Hello, everyone. Gavin, Landry, Director of the Americas here, and I am so looking forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C. as we are able to put forward our Destination Britain North America event for the first time in real life in several years. We're really excited to be able to spend time with you and to talk with you about the opportunity to drive business and drive recovery for the whole of Great Britain. Now, the webinar you're about to watch will focus on the current tourism landscape in North America and the recovery so far. We will also be exploring key market trends and behavior shifts from travelers in the region, informed from a brand new exploratory piece of international research from VisitBritain that Anna Harris will be discussing with you in detail. Before I get to the current traveler behaviors, let me talk to you about what our goals at VisitBritain are relative to the recovery. We understand how tough it has been over the past 2 years, and we are well on our way to a recovery when it comes to our visitor volume and our tourism business coming from North America. But we know that there's still work to do. So our goals were simple. We needed to align with the British government's stated goals in the tourism recovery plan, and we needed to have our own ability to make a difference to help drive the prosperity of Great Britain as soon as possible. Let me take you through our goals. The first was really to help the British inbound tourism recover as soon as possible, recovering value or spend, if you will, by 2023. Now, that's a year earlier than was set out in the tourism recovery plan by the British government. So we knew we had a role to play to help drive the prosperity of Great Britain and do it as soon as possible. Our next goal was around repositioning Britain to increase consideration to visit and grow long-term market share. As you know, travel is a globally competitive industry, and none more than here in North America when everyone is focusing on this market to help them recover both internationally and domestically. To tell you that the likes of California and Hawaii and Florida are also going after our US-based customers to help drive their recovery would be an understatement. And we've also got the typical competitive set that's here in North America as well to contend with. So we know that we have to do our work and do our job well. The next was around spreading the benefits of tourism across the nations and regions and extending the season. This is a key piece of our strategy around sustainability. That is dispersal and helping to support the economies of the localities across the nations and regions vis-a-vis tourism. And then last, it was our goal is to support the industry to rebuild. As you know, the detritus of the pandemic has been severe and everyone has been affected, from our destination marketing organization partners to the DMCs, to the attractions, the hotels and restaurants. Everyone has been affected by the pandemic. And so our job at Visit Britain, both in market and also at our headquarters in London, is to help to drive the support of the industry as best as we can. And I think you'll be aware of some of the programs that we have done to help to drive that support for industry. Next, let me tell you about the North American traveler. Now, some of this is similar to what we learned or we knew prior to the pandemic, but now that we're going into this endemic phase, we understand that there are some significant changes in travel behavior and travel mindset. Now, the household finances have been strong in North America over the past 2 years. The travel ban has really created this strong pent-up demand for travel, and the US and Canada have been really driving the recovery of the UK so far in 2022. BB research demonstrates the acceleration and the desire for North Americans to travel internationally in the next 12 months, along with demand that has been the highest since the onset of the pandemic. Anna will touch on this later, but I can tell you anecdotally, I met with an airline partner recently in Atlanta, and they told me that their June of 2022 was the best year in the airline's history, as an example. The US dropping COVID testing requirements for entry in June of 22 has further compounded the surge in likelihood to travel internationally. It's really helped. And that is especially true for American travelers. So this gives Britain a great opportunity to tap into the large market potential of travelers coming from this region. Now, there are a few things that are tempering that pent-up demand and consumer mindset. And I'll take you through really two of those, which are financial concerns and COVID-related concerns. On the financial front, there are a number of factors that are likely to at least some degree tamper the trajectory of growth we have seen so far this year. The most significant one is the cost of living and the financial squeeze. Now, this is true as well in the UK. We all know that there is a real cost of living crisis going on. But the dollar is strong, so the dollar is stretching further against the pound, and that is, of course, being tempered by a soaring inflation, which in the U.S. is at a 41-year high, and Canada is at a 30-year high. And skyrocketing fuel prices have driven up the cost of living and made travel much more expensive. You will know that yourself from just every day kind of looking at what's the cost of a liter of gas, or a gallon of gas for that matter. It seems to be on everyone's mind. Now, there is good news. President Biden just had an economic bill gone through. It was signed just this week in America. So this is the week of good news. That should put more money into Americans' pockets. And fuel prices seem to have reached their peak. They may be falling a bit in the U.S. and Canada, but we still have those financial concerns that may dampen optimism about travel plans. And lastly, I'll tell you that there is an election. It's called the midterm election here in the U.S. in November, and elections do also tend to have a bit of a dampening effect on travel in terms of how they create some uncertainty. Now, when it comes to COVID, the industry has emerged from the pandemic, as I mentioned, into this endemic phase, but airport disruptions, delays, queues, cancellations, as well as inadequate service concerns brought on by staffing issues, not rebounding to meet the current travel demand, are factors that are currently denting travel sentiment. I talked to a group of tour operators recently that told me that there was a time when people were traveling, when we were coming out of the pandemic, that they were okay with the idea that the experience wouldn't be one for one. But the traveler is now over that. The traveler is now wanting value for money, and also wanting the experience they had prior to the pandemic. And if we're not in that position, we're certainly not meeting our travelers' needs. Now, on the good front, I always like to be positive. Travel outlook remains favorable. We recently had our Deloitte Consumer Tracker highlight that the confidence in travel internationally in both the U.S. and Canada is at record highs. For the U.S., it's the highest since last September. And in July, Canada reached 1 out of 4 in terms of intent to travel. So we know that there is a high intent to travel, and that Britain is top of mind as a result of our efforts to keep it there with our trade teams. And despite the financial concerns, leisure travel continues to be a high priority. People are using their budgets or dedicating part of their personal budgets to travel as a priority. This is particularly true for our audience, our target audience, which is the high net worth buzz seekers, who really would rather have an experience than they would have than stuff, as it were. So that's a little bit about what we're seeing in North America, and Anna will take you through in much more detail. But I look forward to seeing you very, very soon in Washington, D.C. Please travel safely, be well, let's have some fun, let's have great conversations about how we can drive recovery together. See you soon, everyone. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the intro, Gavin, and thank you for joining me today for the main part of the webinar. My name is Anna, and I work in the VisitBritain International Research Team, supporting the Americas market with insight and research. I'm here today to dive into the research from North American region, touching upon current tourism landscape and the recovery so far following on from the pandemic. We'll be exploring key market trends and behaviour shifts in travellers in the region. We have identified from a brand new piece of research, Gavin mentioned, from VisitBritain, MIDAS we're calling it, which stands for Motivations, Influences, Decisions and Sustainability. So let's get cracking. So we're starting off by looking at the tourism landscape in the North American region. So we're going to start off by looking at the US in a little bit more detail. It's the largest, most valuable inbound market for the UK from a tourism perspective. In 2019, which is the last normal year, the UK welcomed 4.5 million US visitors, spending just over £4 billion. That's over 1 in 10 international arrivals into the UK and from the US, and spending £15 in every 100. So a really significant market. Looking at the chart now on the left-hand side, this is a chart showing visits from the US and spend from the US over time. So you can see actual visits and spend from 2019 to 2020, and you can see the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on visits and spend to the UK, which has seen a huge drop-off in arrivals in 2020. There was a plan in place between the US and the UK for about 18 months, as I'm sure you're well aware, and you can see arrivals and spend dropped by kind of almost 80% across that time period. You've got a dotted line here which represents anything forward from that point onwards. On the right hand side is a forecast through association with both VisitBritain and Oxford Economics. And you can see the projections up until 2030. So we expect 2/3 of pre-pandemic visits from America to be expected by the end of 2022. We see and expect a strong uplift to continue well into 23 and 2024, with pre-pandemic volumes recovery expected by 2024, while spend expected to surpass 2019 figures by 2023, so a little bit earlier. In terms of the long term, Americans is projected to grow strongly. US visitor economy is expected to reach close to £7 billion in spend and up to 5.7 million visits by 2030. Now looking at the Canadian market, it's the 14th largest and the 11th most valuable source market to the UK pre-COVID, so around 2019. So obviously not as big, but still an important source market for the UK overall. In 2019, Canada was enjoying strong growth in visits. So record spend reached in 2019 at £0.7 billion. So as you can see to the chart to the left-hand side, it's a smaller scale to the US, but it's still very much a trajectory in the right direction. They were spending more than those, spend was £0.7 billion, spending more than those from maybe like Saudi Arabia or Switzerland or Hong Kong or Qatar. So it's still, a significant market for the UK overall. Canadians have a strong cultural tie to the UK, with 1/3 of Canadian population having a British ancestry. And as a result, there's typically a high proportion of visits to the UK connected with friends and family, 2 in 5 visited for VFR purposes, and real drives a strong regional dispersion too as a result of this. As I alluded to before about the forecast chart, you can see a similar drop-off for COVID pandemic times in terms of inbound numbers coming to the UK, and you can see the projection to 2030 going forward. We can similar patterns with regards to the projections. Pre-pandemic recovery forecast, however, is expected to be slightly more sluggish than the US. Compared to the US, pre-pandemic volumes expected to exceed 2019 figures by 2025, while spend achieved by around 2024. Canadian visits are expected to follow a strong growth trajectory, exceeding 1.1 million visits and 1.2 billion spend by 2030. So moving on to look at seat capacity between North America and the UK, and we're focusing on the US first. So having a growth in seat capacity available for booking supports the recovery for tourism perspective. So we're now looking at the average number of weekly scheduled flight seats. So not passengers, but seats that you can book between the US here to the UK over time. So you've got January to December across the bottom, and then the last 4 years, as you can see, as a trend line over time. So red line is pre-COVID 2019. You can see the average weekly seats available. You can see a seasonality across the year with a more prominent number of seats available across kind of spring, summer time period, as you'd expect. The green line is 2020. You can see a significant drop-off in capacity as COVID hit, around 70% initially, and then a slow and steady recovery in 2021, seeing the blue line. You can see a real uplift there where we've seen opening of borders between the US and the UK at the beginning of August in 2021. The yellow line demonstrates a strong rebound in seat numbers over 2022. You can see the pattern has started to return to pre-pandemic patterns for the red line. And this is recovery, has very much been driven by legacy carriers such as BA and Virgin, as well as new carriers and routes opening up from the likes of, say, JetBlue, which is serving from kind of JFK in Boston to London. And the inaugural flight was set off from Boston to London Heathrow at the beginning of August this year. So we've got new routes and new numbers of seats coming into the market all the time. We can actually look at this source up to 6 months ahead for a reasonable, robust picture in normal times. So I've actually shown what's currently scheduled for the end of the year. So we're looking at September, October, November and December. In the month of September 2022, seat capacity available for booking between the US and the UK is only 17% the levels seen in the same month in 2019 and 11% behind October levels too. So very much closing the gap to pre-pandemic times, and definitely a recovery seed over time. You see there is actually a tailing off in growth in capacity across July and August in 2022. You'd expect it to be a bit higher, but the yellow line between July and August, you see a bit of a petering off and a dip rather than normal recovery trajectory. And this could be driven by the widespread reported cancellations of seats and departures due to post-COVID kind of airport and staffing disruptions that we've seen been reported across the media across the globe, both across Europe and in North America too. Four Keys have done some really interesting analysis recently looking at capacity cutbacks over the world and actual impact that airlines cancelling flights across this time period in July and August has had in real terms. And in summary, Europe was the worst hit overall, but total Americas region, and this includes South America too, as a total region still saw approximately 1 million bookable seats disappear across that time period, which is an actual decline of over 2% over time. So, this disruption that we're seeing is causing, having a real knock-on effect in terms of the number of seats available to book coming to the UK. Following on, looking at Canada now, a similar kind of pattern that you can see. The same colours represent the years in terms of seat capacity. You can see the delay in seat capacity recovery and the recovery in 2021 initially, but capacity rebounds pretty quickly. I've highlighted again then the opening up in Canada in September. It's probably a bit of a quicker rebound in the US, although we are thinking of looking at much smaller numbers if you look at the scale across the US versus Canada. In the month of September 2022, seat capacity between Canada and the UK is only 13% behind 2019 numbers and 14% for October. So very much a recovery on the horizon as well with regards to Canada and seat capacity. Moving on, and another interesting data source we use to measure recovery levels is Forward Keys data. This is the number of flight bookings from North America across a week compared to the number of bookings in the same week in 2019 or a pre-pandemic level. So the North American bookings and the 2-year change is in the blue bar, and the red line represents the all-market average. So you can see how the region is faring up to the all-market average over time. Weekly data can be volatile, but it's a fantastic method of kind of painting a picture of the recovery landscape overall. I've stretched this right back to August 2021, last year, when the borders reopened between the US and in September it was Canada. And you can see the recovery, the kind of return to 2019 or zero levels you can see from when the borders opened over time. And then you can also see the impact of the detrimental impact of Omicron hitting the region last November, and over the Christmas period you can see the booking numbers between North America and coming to the UK dropped back down again kind of middle of December last year. Flight bookings from North America have recovered well from that variant across the first quarter of 2022 and basically matching 2019 figures or pre-pandemic levels in early June this year. And in fact, we do have actually data specifically just for the US, and it just slightly edged into pre-pandemic levels of middle of June. So actually they exceeded the number of bookings this year versus in 2019 in the middle of June, which is great. And this is in part following on from the removal of the border testings that were in place in the US, so having to have a negative result before you could return back to the US, and that was lifted at the beginning of June this year. We're moving in to look at booking rates into July relative to 2019. Bookings have slowed in line with a wider kind of trend of total inbound market to the UK. This dip in mid-July I've looked into, and it's driven by a drop-off in new bookings, but also an increase in cancellations of bookings to the UK. With that airport chaos reported in the media, especially strongly in the UK and across Europe, it's likely to be a driving factor here. The outlook for summer is still positive. We see an improvement already in the last few weeks, but the headwinds do create an uncertainty. And the most recent week's data, bookings are behind 12% behind levels in the same week in 2019. Or another way of looking at it is it's 88% of the levels expected in 2019. You can see that actually the region is performing much stronger than the average, and actually North America is the strongest performing region, showing the fastest recovery of all global regions overall. In a similar vein, as well as we've got bookings, we've also got footfall, so weekly arrivals coming from North America to the UK. And you can see the same time period you can see over time. There's a lag as bookings go up, then arrival increases are likely to follow. At the moment, we're at 24% behind footfall seen in the same week 2 years ago, before the pandemic. It's a bit of volatility, but normal levels of fluctuation. And again, stronger than the market result and the strongest rebound seen across all global regions. And finally, this section, Gavin alluded and mentioned briefly in his introduction, travel sentiment has been increasing over time, and VisitBritain's consumer sentiment tracker has demonstrated the acceleration in intention to travel internationally in the next 12 months. So this COVID dipped into time periods for 4 times since December 2020 up until February 2021, February 2022, wave 4 this year. So for the US, 80% of Americans are considering taking an international leisure trip in the next 12 months, and that's more than half said they definitely would. The consideration has been growing at a great rate since the start of the tracker. It was lagging somewhat behind the all-market average in the first 2 waves. However, consideration has really grown significantly in the summer last year, and level of enthusiasm for international travel remains high and stable for this wave too. Conversely, Canadian travellers have actually been quite cautious in the first 3 waves of the tracker. International travel sentiments have been improving over time, but intention has lagged behind the market average. However, this wave in February this year has been a notable growth in confidence to travel, and intention to grow has significantly grown wave on wave, with now 3 in 4 Canadians considering an international leisure break in the next 12 months. From 71%, and the highest level intention since the start of the pandemic. So intention is there in terms of travel, and it's at its highest from the North American region travelling internationally. Okay, moving on now and looking at international travel in a post-pandemic world from North America. Now, these insights are based upon our big research project that we're running at the moment, and just looking at the results now, and we've called it Motivations, Influences, Decisions and Sustainability in a Post-Pandemic Era. It's one of the largest projects VisitBritain has conducted for the last several years. It's a multi-market, quantitative, exploratory piece of work on 29 markets. And I'm going to be focusing mainly on North America overall as a market, but where appropriate, I've pulled out some kind of market differences and nuances where I see fit. And we're going to look at market opportunity for US and Canada separately. And this is looking at visiting Britain over the next 2 years. And it's based on those considering visiting Britain, so the future potential of this market over time. And as I've touched upon previously, pre-pandemic, the US was the largest, most valuable traveller market to Britain. And in the most recent data, this supports this too. Distance is not a barrier for travel with long-haul markets. This research has shown, and the US is particularly showing very high affinity for visiting Britain overall. America's travel propensity to visit Britain in the next 2 years of holiday or short break is rated 7.5 out of 10. And this is both above the long-haul average and the all-market average too. Interestingly, on the top left-hand corner in the box here, what we've done is to split the score of visitors versus considerers, and it's interesting to note that those that have visited in the last 5 years are on average are more interested in visiting again, with a score of 8.0, and this is against what we'd normally probably expect. And the data suggests it's driven by those that have visited during the pandemic, which has a heightened desire to revisit Britain, as visitors may have been unable to satisfy maybe their experiences of a full kind of British break on holiday in the same way they may have done pre-pandemic. So, there's an opportunity for those returning visitors there, not just those that are considering visiting and have not visited before. Looking at the top comp set in the top right-hand corner, considering those visiting in the next 2 years. Amongst this core competitor set of Europe, Britain is the number 1 choice for US travellers' minds, with 60% very likely to visit, and the likes of Italy and France being the closest direct competitors. We also asked about whether their intention to travel as a multi-destination within Europe or just visiting Britain alone. And it's worth noting, actually, for long-haul markets especially, it's more likely that travellers will visit Britain as part of a multi-destination trip to Europe. And this makes sense. But while this is an intention for over half of US travellers, there is much stronger opportunity actually from the US market for visiting Britain only, with 41% from the US market versus the long-haul average of 30%. So interesting to note that there's quite a large proportion of those that are intending to visit Britain just coming to Britain and not going elsewhere. In terms of where they're thinking of going, consideration is highest amongst England with 87%, and there's still a great potential for Wales too, but Scotland at the moment, its intention is high but on par with the average. Looking at the bar on the left-hand side, looking at where they're likely to visit, London is very much at the forefront of travellers' minds on where to visit and dominates their future travel plans, with 3 in 4 considering a visit in the future. Northwest is a popular option, as well as Southeast and East of England too, which ranks higher on the list, so to speak. But regional dispersion, if you look at the list, really, it's always been a bit of a challenge for North America, especially the US. A bit of an educational opportunity or increasing awareness here is probably needed. And looking at travel companion as a finishing off point here, when likely to visit Britain, 7 in 10 travellers are expecting to travel with partners, and 1 in 3 travelling with kids, which is both higher than the long haul average. Moving on to the Canadian market, Canadians have a high affinity for visiting Britain, ranking number one destination amongst European competitor set, as you can see on the top right-hand side. They do have a lower than average propensity to visit Britain, though scoring 6.7 out of 10. But then all scores are lower across the board here, as Canadians are more cautious with their international travel intentions. You'll see that the intention is 44% to visit Britain across kind of the competitor set, and it's at number one in terms of all of the core European competitor set, ahead of again the same key competitors, Italy and France, that we've seen for the US market too. Almost 70% intend to visit Britain as part of a multi-European trip, so that's higher than the US market, with only 1 in 4 visiting Britain on its own. Well, that's in the expectation anyway. It's interesting in terms of travel companions, when likely to visit Britain, they're actually less likely to travel with partner on average versus the average, although still 1 in 2 are expecting to do so, as well as less likely to travel with children under 18, with 1 in 5 expected to travel in that way. And interestingly, much more likely to travel alone, 18%. And this could be indicative of those wanting to, maybe a high proportion wanting to visit friends and family and visiting on their own to go and connect with those loved ones that they've not seen for a while, or reconnecting with other people, their friends and family. By region, Canadians over-index for intention to travel across England, Scotland and Wales. As well as mentioned previously, they're more inclined to visit regions around the UK and within England versus the US. While London is the firm favourite, the data supports the intention to get out of London, and a bit of a push for regional dispersion there, and an opportunity maybe to promote lesser well-known places for the likes of the Canadian market. So moving on to understand more about kind of trip intention and ways for planning and thinking about planning their next international trip in the next 2 years. So as travel gains traction following the pandemic, there are many remaining considerations on travellers' minds when planning their next trip, many that actually would have not been considered so much so before the pandemic. So we asked respondents to select a consideration that are more important to them when planning their next break compared to the pre-pandemic, and then asked them to pick the most important factors personally to them, which I've actually highlighted with a star. When it comes to travel, reassurance around personal health and safety and flexibility of bookings are the most essential kind of COVID-related considerations for travellers, and this also extends to the costs involved in the cover of the unexpected too. Other considerations still key are ease of travel around once there, particularly strong for the US market, and also insurance cover for COVID-related disruptions were strong considerations on the list for Canadians too. With regards to conflict with the Ukraine on trip planning, international conflicts have an enormous impact on tourism willingness to travel internationally. Visit Britain's research identified that reluctance to travel internationally due to the conflict was more impacted in the long-haul markets. And this, perhaps was to do with more significant investment in both kind of time and cost, so to speak. And at the time of the field work, this is a month into the conflict at the time, 4 in 10 North Americans said they were less willing to travel internationally. And comparatively, willingness to travel to Britain has not been affected as much, with travellers being concerned about European travel over Britain travel, with double the number of people concerned about travelling to Europe versus the Britain, with 11%. Looking at important factors driving that destination choice for the next international trip, it's actually the offer of a warm welcome, so it's a welcoming place to visit, good value for money, and the ease of getting around in the destinations once there, which is the key drivers of destination choice in 2022 for North Americans. They're also motivated by choosing destinations with lots of places to visit and explore, such as roaming around, offering different experiences in one destination, etc. And this is what they're looking for, and what's really driving the decision when they make a decision on where to go next on their holidays. There's some unique market skews. So, for example, in the US, it's a place where they explore history and heritage, which really features most strongly in third position for Americans, while is a good variety of food and drink places to try, and is an inclusive and accessible for visitors like me. Both enter the top 10 motivators for Canada and feature as most important when considering where to go. Conversely, visitors from Americas are less likely to be looking for rest and relaxation on their next international break, and this was ranked the lowest and it was also against the all-market average too. They're also more motivated by choosing destination, with lots of places to visit and explore, and this is really playing to Britain's strengths overall. Moving on to look at generally speaking, preferred holiday types. And we asked respondents to share their preferences for holiday types in the next 2 years to really get a sense of what the mix may be. So seeing actually famous sites and places and ticking off the must-to list is strongly over-indexes against the average, both for the US and Canada, as does exploring, simulating and challenging themselves too. It's very much playing to the strong kind of offering for Britain as a destination overall. On the flip side, holiday preferences not sought after on international break amongst this market is relaxing, resting and recharging is a real theme here. So people from North America aren't looking for those things. They're looking to be kind of stimulated, challenged. They want to go to all those famous sites, tick off the must-do lists rather than relaxing and resting. Canada also differs with a strong mix of wanting to visit in friends and family, which chimes quite nicely as well with kind of their connections with the UK market. Looking at activities specifically now, and this is the bar chart looking at the US and Canada on the left-hand side here. North Americans, international travellers have a similar preference when it comes to activities and interest generally as they plan to seek out on their break or abroad. And we've listed them, the top 10 here on the chart to the left-hand side, as I said, and there is an albeit in a slightly different order. North Americans are ready to dive into coastal places and scenery and explore history and heritage, such as historical sites and architecture. Local food and drink is a big pull, as is visiting famous or iconic tourist attractions too. So cultural attractions, socialising and outdoor remains, themes and activities interests overall, which is very much the case of kind of some of those interests and themes that we saw before the pandemic hit us in 2019. Moving on and actually overlaying a bit of interest with regards to Britain. And we also ask about the desired experiences and activities when specifically visiting Britain next. So either those that are planning to visit or are considering a trip. So we can start to really unpick the products and experiences that distinctly sought after when visiting Britain and are seen more unique to Britain in relation to other destinations abroad. So I've just highlighted for you some here with the US and Canada, but there is some similarities that I've bolded up. You would expect. So culture and iconic attractions are the most distinct. So visiting famous iconic tourist attractions and cultural events, for example. But there's also some market nuances at play a little here with history and heritage strong pull for Britain versus abroad, city life and visiting famous shops and streets for the US. While Britain's edge for Canadians, and while it's only slightly marginal, is so much such as fine dining. Moving on to perceptions of Britain, we asked about perceptions amongst both visitors and considerers from North America, and this slide shows the rankings of the US and Canada relative to the global or all market average. So, for example, for all the 29 markets, this is overall to the left-hand side, the global rank represents what all of those markets see Britain as being perceived as overall. There are long-haul markets that share commonalities in terms of core perceptions, but there's also some areas of flex that can be identified, even between the similar markets such as the US and Canada. And you can see how some of the rankings differ between the US and Canada too. It's quite interesting to pull apart and look at the differences here. Perceptions of Britain post-pandemic overall are dominated by the combination of history and vibrancy, as you'd expect, a mixture of the old and the new. So the top ranking is a place where I can explore history and heritage. And this is true for North Americans too. It's number one in terms of the top perception. It's also good for sightseeing, famous sites, ticking off the to-do lists, and vibrant towns and cities are also coming out as strong perceptions for Britain amongst North Americans relative to the global kind of rankings overall. Welcome is a key motivator for destination for North America. We've seen before, it's a key factor that kind of influences the choice of where to go next. And this fares well with perception rankings for the Britain. With the US, it's 55% agreement and 61% for Canada in terms of seeing Britain as somewhere as a more welcoming place to visit. Ease of getting around was high on North Americans' key driver as well, as we've seen before, but Britain has many more dominant perceptions here. It features lower in terms of the strength of perception for Britain for North American markets. So it might be worth dialing this element up and reminding or re-educating travellers on this area of Britain. Compared to the global average, North Americans are more likely to associate Britain as a place with interesting local people to meet and a good variety of food and drink to try. It's inclusive and accessible for visitors like me is a perception for Britain held high amongst, really high actually, in the US, which is really interesting to see, while Canada offers a lot of different experiences in one destination and a place recommended by friends and family that distinguish it from the global average perceptions overall. Conversely, when we look at the weaker perceptions, they are particularly in North America less likely to associate it as being a place for relaxing, resting and recharging, which we've kind of seen before. And the real key one here is offering good value for money was ranked as one of the weakest perceptions for Britain. And this was overall across all markets actually, as well as North America. So North America isn't just kind of a standout here, it's across the board, and it's a real Achilles heel for Britain overall, and a challenge that Britain faces, especially in light of, such a financial kind of worrying and uncertain time with regards to the cost of living crisis seen across Britain, Europe and North America overall. It was ranked second lowest ranking perception for North America, and not great with North Americans feeling the pinch too. Moving on to key influences at play during inspirational phase of the customer journey. So now we're looking at the customer journey section. We really wanted to get into and really delve into understanding what kind of sources and intermediaries and stakeholders do North Americans use during the customer journey phase. So here we're starting at looking at the inspirational or the influences that they use to make a decision on where to go on their next trip. So what tools, touch points or resources do North Americans use at each stage in the decision making? And how does this differ when we're talking about trips to Britain? So travel websites via search engines are the most important factor in the process, initially topping the rankings for North Americans at 41%, as you can see in the chart here. And then visiting friends and family, they really do feature really strongly as an influential source to this audience and play a huge part in the inspirational journey for North American travellers overall. Recommendations by friends and family are in second place, and friends and family also appear in third place with social media as kind of personal connections playing a part too, with regards to interactions and connections and recommendations from friends and family on social media. So really highlights the importance of welcome overall and driving those recommendations to others as people come and visit Britain. It's an important factor for us all in the process. National Tourist Boards ranks higher than we'd normally observe, actually. It's the fourth in the list. And it really highlights the need for reconnecting with websites of authority, up-to-date information from a trusted source of advice on the ground. Another source which ranked at 11th, so I haven't included in this chart here, but just dropped off, was advice from information centres in the destination I'm visiting, which was 11th out of I think over 25 different sources. So 1 in 4 strongly over-indexed against the average, especially for the US. Real North Americans is showing that they're seeking on the ground or local advice for information places of authority, really overall. Another key theme that's coming out here is movies and television series programs are really high influence for North Americans. International movie sets in destinations and those that include actors as well or directors from their home countries serve as a source of information for their next leisure trip. And this plays to one of Britain's strengths too, with huge following from the likes of Downton Abbey, Sherlock, Bridgerton, and this could be used as a source of information too. And also, the ongoing investment in movies and TV productions here in Britain, it's growing year on year, and there's only going to be more kind of sources of influence for Britain out there in the future for travellers to be inspired by. And finally, looking at bargain deals. The bargain deals on airfares and tours is interesting for this audience. It under-indexes against the all-market average, ranking 13th place. And at this initial stage, bargain deals is not part of the equation. It's the imagery from online websites and tourist boards and recommendations from people they trust and TV movies that captures their imagination here. It's not about the deals at this point in time in the customer journey. Moving on to looking at stakeholders and the role of stakeholders at the inspiration, the deciding and the planning stages. We're not looking at booking yet, so just the first 3 sections. And North Americans who visit Britain in the past 5 years use a wide spread of trade stakeholders along the customer journey across these 3 phases. So you can see the usage on the right-hand side, but this is across North America and overall at the 3 stages. So peer review sites, which is the third one down, are most often used in the inspiration and the deciding phase, while price comparison sites, which is number one on this list here, are key to the decision making and the planning phases, where the peer review sites then become less relevant. The relevance begins to diminish somewhat. Online travel agents are used most often when compared to traditional or specialist travel agents, but still have an active role in the process overall, helping to provide some of that trust and reassurance with a slightly more relevance within the deciding phase of the journey overall. And finally, airlines seem to be most important in the deciding and the planning phases, while online marketplaces become marginally less important as travellers move through the process. Finishing off with booking, North Americans have slightly higher propensity to book all elements of their trip together, with almost half booking their most recent trip to Britain as a package. This is much higher than the all market average and the long average too. So, short haul markets in Europe are more likely to book elements separately, whereas 1 in 5 book all elements separately from North America. This is lower than average, while a third books some, but not all together, all elements together. So now we're looking at the below use of intermediaries during the booking process for trips to Britain. The role of intermediaries of packing bookings are in blue. Package holders in blue, trade stakeholders use those booking some or all elements of a trip are reflected in green or red bars depending on whether you're looking at travel bookings or accommodation bookings. So generally speaking, North Americans use a range of trade stakeholders when making their bookings. For package, which is the most popular bookings I've just mentioned, OTAs and price comparison sites joint lead, followed by travel agents that provide that kind of personal interaction. So the ones that are kind of found on the high street, so to speak. When booking elements of the trip separately, so either all or some of the trip elements, for North Americans, it's the direct bookings with providers which really kind of top the rankings here and over-index overall. So that's either with travel providers such as the airline companies, if we're talking about travel, or accommodation providers, which is hotels. And they top the list for top trade stakeholders and strongly over-index against the all-market average. Other intermediaries play a part too, such as price comparison sites are both travel and accommodation bookings, so it's worth mentioning that too. Also, just at the bottom here, I kind of summed together the overall kind of travel agents and tour operators and how much to really understand the part that they play within the booking process. And we can actually see that approximately 50% of travel agents or tour operators are involved with the package booking, so play a much larger part versus kind of those that book some or all of their trip elements separately. So you're looking at kind of a third for travel agents and tour operators with those types of bookings. Finally, just moving on to the last mini topic here, touching upon sustainability. So the nature of international travel is, changing. It's not all of these changes are directly attributable to the pandemic, yet some have been definitely highlighted by it. And sustainability is a key trend we're witnessing, particularly in light of, the devastation caused by global warming overall. So while it's more relevant to younger travellers in particular, the strength of the narrative around climate change is, really strong, and we anticipate it will quickly become a mainstream need and a decisional influence. We have seen before that as part of a factor, an influencing factor, sustainability at the moment is low, much lower, but it's definitely going to kind of accelerate in terms of its importance over time. So here I've just pulled together some key bits of kind of research we've found outside of the Midas data here. So over half of Americans agree that COVID pandemic has encouraged them to live more sustainably. And this is from January this year of our feature, a Foresight Factory trends agency that we use have highlighted this. A sizable portion of those from America or North America intend to now think more about sustainability and the environment when planning their future holidays. So almost 2/3 in the US and over half of Canadians agree with this statement. I've actually pulled this out for America and looked at it over the ages. So it really highlights the relevance amongst the younger generations and how it drops off slightly as we move into the older generations. So, the older populations of, say, over 55, it drops off. So you can see there's definitely a more resonance amongst the younger audience, but it will shift. We feel it will shift over time as we move. This becomes more of a mainstream kind of influencer. So moving back to looking at the insights from our own research and looking at sustainability, it means different things to different people, you know, when you talk about sustainable or responsible tourism. So we asked them what it meant to them. And in North America, over half, it means making every effort to enjoy holidays in a way that minimises the impact on our planet. So for example, the carbon footprint. The left-hand side, here's a chart here that looks at things that North American travellers have done or intend to do with regards to sustainable tourism when they're on holiday. So buying local, using public transport or greener transport alternatives, and travelling in off-peak times to lighten the load of over-tourism are the top sustainable actions taken on holiday so far. When you're looking at actual behaviour versus intentions, staying in eco-friendly accommodation has a stronger intention in the future, and enjoying, you know, pristine natural environments too are the ones that see a big difference between kind of have done or will do in the past. That's where it's going to be a stronger intention to do more of in the future. But there are still barriers, you know, that we need to address, and we explored that as well. So in particular, the perceived cost is consistent across markets in terms of a barrier to driving more sustainable kind of actions and choices, as well as topping the list across North America. Another key barrier is lack of reliable information about how to make the right choices in an overseas destination, which is interesting, an area that, you know, can be focused on within the trade from Britain, within Britain, to help educate travellers coming to Britain to make better choices. So just to finish off now, the challenges and opportunities, I just wanted to summarise some of these from within the North American market. So starting off with the challenges. So number one, the future international travel plans could be tempered by financial concerns or post-COVID disruptions. This is definitely a challenge that we expect to be facing within the industry in the next, the short to the longer term, going into next year. Perceptions of Britain's value for money are key Achilles heel at the time when cost of living is increasing for North Americans and across the globe, really. So could we, maybe dial up some of the free itineraries and value-added experiences that are free too, as a way of kind of trying to highlight where value can be seen, good value can be seen from a Britain offering. Confidence to travel have accelerated, as I said before, but elements of uncertainty remain. So consumers continue to demand flexibility when booking, and reassurance about health and safety still does remain. I mentioned London-centric as well intentions when visiting Britain. We could leverage Britain's strong perceptions of, being seen as offering vibrant towns and cities to explore as a hook to, promote lesser-known areas of the UK. And then there's the ease of getting around once on holiday. It's a key driver of destination choice for North Americans, and Britain has maybe a weaker or a lower down the list in terms of perceptions of this element. So could we improve communication surrounding transportation options, which may improve, intention to explore regions outside of London in the future, outside of London further and into the future. And finally, looking at the opportunities. There's a high interest in both international travel and for visiting Britain amongst the North American market. It's the strongest region for bookings and arrivals to the UK, and it's got solid long-term forecasts as expected. So it's a market with significant opportunity for Britain. Key holiday preferences and interests in North America travellers play to Britain's strengths, and these include such as sightseeing opportunities, history and heritage, and cultural and iconic attractions. Britain is perceived as a welcome destination, and this is a key motivator for destination choice. It presents a strong opportunity in driving that word of mouth that's so important and influential amongst those friends and families, which again is a big inspiration and source of information for this travelling kind of market and kind of group of people. North Americans use a mix of sources and trade stakeholders in their customer journey offering, and which offers an opportunity for direct promotion or kind of in cooperation with partnerships too. And then finally, strong intentions to make more sustainable holiday choices is there amongst this audience. So looking to provide, maybe travellers with reliable information to support a more responsible travel decisions, so they can help them make those decisions and choices in the future. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to some of our insights and research. I'm looking forward to seeing some of you, your faces face to face next week at DBNA. Please do look out for further publications of our chapters for Midas. We're going to be delving much further into a lot more detail by market across a number of different key topics of interest coming out of some of the key insights from the Midas research. So that's going to be published over time on our website. So please take a look out for that. And thank you again for joining us today, and see you again soon. Thanks.